Yes. Again, welcome to the webinar number 6 from MSR, and your host will be Tian Yuan Yu. So Tian Yuan, please go ahead. I'll stop sharing and then you can take it from here.
Thanks, Anil. Hello, everyone. My name is Tian Yuan Yu, Associate Professor of Management at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, Canada. I would like to acknowledge that Mount St. Vincent University is located on the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We pay respect to the knowledge embedded in the indigenous custodians of this land and to the elders past, present, and future. First of all, I'd like to borrow a lovely contemplative practice from Dr. Xiaoan Li by asking everyone to have your camera on if that's okay and possible. Because we are getting a large audience, we have 160 registrations, so we expect more people joining us, and I would like to feel the energy of seeing each other in a virtual fashion. So this is an open invitation for you to have your camera on so that we can all share the power of seeing each other. Thank you so much for responding to my invitation. Thank you, everyone. Now, I'd love to lead a 3-minute meditation. Since I'm a Zen Buddhist practitioner, and in Zen tradition, there is no such thing as a guided meditation facilitated by some professionals. We just sit. That is Zen meditation. Now, you may either close your eyes or soften your gaze. The only principle is keep your back straight up so that you remain alert. Please embrace the silence and feel our interconnectedness. I obtained my first PhD in management in Sun Yat-sen University, China in 2012, and began my second PhD study at St. Mary's University, Canada in 2015. My current research focuses on spiritual research paradigm, feminist spiritual leadership, and transformative teaching informed by Zen Buddhism. I joined MSR in 2020 and have been a MSR Board 4 member since then. The mission of Board 4 is to articulate spiritual research methods and paradigms. As the planner and organizer of today's webinar, I want to thank all my Board 4 colleagues and the participants of today's webinar for making today's webinar the largest one since the launch of the MSR Research Webinar Series. A special shout out to Dr. Ramya Venkateswaran for your tireless work on registration and the circulation of the reading piece. I wish to honor all your behind the scenes efforts. They are so important and are tremendously appreciated. Thank you to Dr. Haisa Racha for designing the beautiful poster for the event. Haisa, you are amazing. Also, thank you to Dr. Anil Maheshwari, Dr. Khan Kalam, and Dr. Benito Tihanki for your strong support of the event. My greatest gratitude goes to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Caroline Ellis, for accepting my invitation to offer this webinar to MSR scholars and beyond. Now, I would like to introduce the agenda. Please allow me to share my screen. So today's agenda is I will first explain the session norms and introduce our speakers. Then I will invite Dr. Benito Tihanki to give a short opening remark. After that, I will invite Dr. Caroline Ellis to give a talk for about 20 minutes, followed by a Q&A session or a discussion led by herself. I will only jump in to remind her if there are questions or comments in the chat. And Anil will be announcing the next webinar at the end of the session. Here is a list of the suggested questions for the discussion session. I will post these questions in the chat later. Caroline invites us to share comments about the reading piece, about autoethnography, about our research, and about our workplace experiences. Here are the session norms. Please mute yourself when listening and raise your Zoom hand to speak or type in the chat. I would like to borrow from the MSR retreat guidelines created by Dr. Christina Walker. When you are speaking, be real. Speak from your heart, not from your ego. The academic environment encourages people to look competent and smart. We want to create a shift. Let's be as we are, value unknowing, imperfection, and stupidity. The session will be recorded and the link will be shared to all registered participants. You will also find the recording on the MSR YouTube channel at the link on the slide, and I will post the link in the chat as well. Now, I'm honored to introduce our speaker, Dr. Caroline Ellis. Dr. Caroline Ellis is Distinguished University Professor Emerita at the University of South Florida. She has established an international reputation for her contributions to autoethnography and the narrative study of human life. She has won numerous research awards, including several Lifetime Achievement Awards. she continues to advocate for bringing personal experience, emotions, bodies, and spirituality into social science research. I want to mention that I came to know about Dr. Alice's work because of my PhD cohort members' recommendation, especially by Dr. Christine Williams. Under her leadership, my cohort members collectively built a small online library with all the best scholarly work we've read during our PhD studies. And under the folder of Autoethnography, you will see Dr. Carolyn Alice as the most beloved author. Using the words of Dr. Julia Stolberg-Walker, MSR chair-elect, Dr. Alice is like the grandmother of the field of autoethnography. Through my doctoral research, I suggest that spiritual research must be autoethnographic or intensely introspective, where the researcher plays a starring role, using Julia's words again. Because spiritual experience is subjective, intangible, and nonverbal. It cannot be fully understood through verbal communication. It has to be directly experienced by the researcher themselves. In an autoethnographic research, the researcher should be holistically engaged in searching for a deeper understanding of themselves in relation to others, and use a forefront authorial voice in their writing to acknowledge researcher subjectivity and agency, instead of trying to appear objective, neutral, or detached. That's why I'm so passionate for the topic of today's webinar, Evocative Autoethnography, a research methodology created by Dr. Carolyn Alice. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Benito Tihanki. I'm not sure if Ben is in the room yet. Ben, are you here with us? Looks like Ben is having some problem joining the room in time, but I would still like to introduce Ben. He is the former international representative at large of MSR and a full professor of business ethics at De La Salle University in Manila, Philippines. His research areas include humanistic management, critical realism, and action research. He advocates changes in national policies and business practices in order to improve social inclusion in the Philippine economy. So according to our original plan, Ben will be giving an opening remark. But now, since he has not joined us yet, maybe I would say something. If Anil or Tom would like to do this, I would be happy to turn it over to you. But if you don't, if you want me to do that, I can do that as well, just to introduce the purpose of the webinar series.
Okay, well, if you're talking webinar series, of course, I can say in 30 seconds.
Thank you, Anil.
So, Academy of Management, you're aware of, that's a big body. And within that, management, spirituality, religion is a smaller group of about 700 people. And we are sort of currently in the process of growing ourselves from an interest group to division. Part of our effort is to develop a solid body of knowledge that can be very distinctly and uniquely associated with MSR. So this webinar series is one of the instruments for creating a sort of steady stream of knowledge and creating that coherence in the MSR group for around certain topics. So that's why we are doing a monthly thing. This is about 6th webinar, 6th or 7th actually. And we'll have another one coming up later, which I'll announce at the end. So that's the idea of the webinar series. And this particular webinar also fits into what's called Board 4, which is what Tom is leading and Tian-Yuan is helping. So this has a sort of slightly different additional perspective that Tian-Yuan explained as possibly leading to a research corpus on a certain particular theme of certain kinds of research methods. That is the idea of the thing. Hope that helps. Go ahead, Tian-Yuan.
Thank you, Anil. Yeah, by doing this research webinar series, we want to convey our idea that research solely based on positivism fundamentally rejects metaphysics, and hence is not an ideal mode of inquiry for the role of spirituality and religion in management. So we are calling for spiritual research paradigm that examine the inner experience, ultimate meaning or purpose, transcendence, and interconnectedness with community, nature, and divinity that should be based on multiple research paradigms. This is all I have to say. And next, I would like to invite Dr. Carolyn Ellis to give her talk on evocative ethnography. Carolyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I so appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm so appreciative of Dr. Yu's invitation and all the work that she's done to bring me to this talk, and also all of the rest of you who have organized this interest group, which is just so intriguing to me, and all that you've done also to contribute to my being here. I want to thank all of you for attending and taking time out of your busy schedules to come to yet another Zoom event. So I hope you're all doing well. I appreciated the meditation at the beginning, which really kind of softened me, and hopefully you too, and made me feel very connected, even though all I can see is your picture on the screen. I wish we could be together. That's always my preferred way of being, but I'm happy that we have this opportunity to be together in this way. So today what I want to do is first introduce myself and then talk a little bit about evocative autoethnography. And then I want to turn to the idea of calling our spirit back in the university setting. I will address the question of how evocative autoethnography might provide a spiritual research practice for all of us. Then I hope to open up a discussion, as Dr. Yu said, of collegiality and spiritual practice in the university. And I'd also like to get your responses to a piece that I published that was distributed to all registrants, and I think is available for anybody who didn't get that. The chapter that many of you have is entitled Failing to Communicate in a Communication Department. A former chair calls her spirit back. This piece describes a communication breakdown that occurred when I was chair, and the sadness, anger, and hurt that arose from that experience. After a brief description of that event, I want to invite you to share your stories about organization breakdowns and resulting emotions that you have experienced in your workplaces, and perhaps even ideas about how to cope better with those. So first, who am I? I was educated as a sociologist at the University of Stony Brook. I got my degree in 1981. And I want to say that from day one, I have seen myself as an ethnographer. So that's one of my primary identities in the academy. I spent my first 15 years as a faculty member in a sociology department, and then the last 22 in a communication department, all at the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida, which is where I am right now, or I'm very close to Tampa, Florida, in a little town called Safety Harbor, Florida. And it is very safe here. I have been happily retired since August 2018. So let's go back to the beginning just for a moment. In 1982, my brother died in a plane crash on his way to visit me. It was a commercial plane crash. And at that time, my partner of 9 years was in the last stages of a terminal disease. I was a young beginning assistant professor, and I did what I knew how to do best. I turned to keeping ethnographic field notes about what was going on with me, how I was feeling, the crises that occurred, the trips to the hospital, all of it. I would just go to my study and I would just start writing about it all. I felt at that time that that was the best sociology I had ever written, even though it didn't look like traditional sociology. I also found it to be very therapeutic. in at least two ways. One, when I was sitting at my desk typing, it kind of normalized my world, which was full of crises when I went outside of my study. So it normalized my world. But it also helped me deal with the clutter that was in my mind. I don't know about you, but when I'm having a traumatic experience like that, my mind just goes wild and it's going off in every direction and it's just speeding about everything that has to be done and everything I have to think about. And I found that when I would type these field notes, it was almost soothing. It's like, okay, here it is. There's the experience. It's not going away. I can put it away for a moment and clear my mind to think about what do I have to do now? What's important to do now? So in that way, it was very therapeutic, helping me to deal with all of the things that I had to deal with. After many attempts of what to do with these hundreds of pages of field notes, I finally wrote my story more as a novel. And it came out in a book called Final Negotiations, a story of love, loss, and chronic illness. And that really was the beginning of evocative autoethnography as I practice it. I felt at that time that the best way to convey my experience of the dying and death of my partner and all it involved was to invite others into what had happened through storytelling. That was after thinking about categorizing and thematizing and all those kinds of things and interviewing other people and having control groups. I mean, I thought about all of it, but when ultimately, I just felt the best way was to write it as a story. The response I got from friends was great. They all found it evocative. They identified with me. They cried for me. They liked the writing. That was fantastic. But from my colleagues in sociology, I got, well, if you have to do this for therapy, go ahead. But this is not sociology. It's not research. It doesn't tell you anything about generalized experience. It doesn't say anything about my experience. It's just about yours. I also got that it was too literary. It was more like a novel. It was more like a memoir than it was traditional analytic sociological writing. Well, I felt, however, that I was onto something from the responses, the positive, which were overwhelming, and even the negative ones. They made me determined to make my case that what I was doing was or should be considered sociology. So in response, I then wrote a piece called Systematic Sociological Introspection as a way of doing social science research. And I argued in that piece, and I argued more in a very traditional analytic way to reach the audience I wanted to reach, that introspection was not a perfect method. It had its problems just like any other methods, but it also had its strengths, and it provided a way to get to some information about human behavior that we probably could not get in any other way. I also have to say that much later, I changed my orientation from one of, please let me in, please consider this to be sociology. I changed it to one of, I don't care what you call it, I just want to connect with scholars all over the world who appreciate and want to do this work. And that was a real important change in orientation for me. That led to a movement advocating radical reflexivity, or autoethnography as it came to be called. I didn't call it that right in the beginning. I saw it as a way to get at the emotional, bodily, and spiritual aspects of human life in a cultural context. And let me mention that as of a few days ago, there were over 78,000 citations to autoethnography in Google Scholar. There are many conferences committed to autoethnography. We have our own journal, Journal of Autoethnography, and many journals welcome autoethnography. There are conferences or dissertations from this perspective and so on. And one, if you are interested in this, you can email me later and I'm happy to give you any information you want. But just if you go to our autoethnography site, one of them, it's called iani.org. It's IAANI.org. You'll find a lot of information there, including a reference to a Zoom conference that we will have next March, and I would love to see all of you there. Now, I want to move to a very brief introduction to some of the properties of evocative autoethnography. First, what do I mean by autoethnography? Well, let's look at the three parts of the word. You have graphy, which is writing, you have auto, which is self, and you have ethno, which is culture or other. So it means that autoethnography is writing about the self and its relationship to the other or culture. So you can see in the definition the importance of writing as inquiry, the importance of bringing the self into the research process, and also making sure to include the relational other and the social and cultural situation in which the action you are describing is embedded. So all three parts of the word are important in autoethnography. This approach differs from traditional social science research in its inclusion of the personal experiences of the self of the researcher and their thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, and sense of spiritual or soul existence. It puts forth a radical empiricism that positions the researcher and describes their experience with the topic at hand and shows their interaction with the other, so that readers know where the author, the teller, is coming from and something about what might have influenced which story is being told and how it is being told. Good autoethnography asks you to be vulnerable, to show your warts and bad judgment along with the good. It asks you to make characters multidimensional rather than simplistic, to take the role of the other and think about how they might tell the story, and to write from a place of trying to understand the complexities of a situation rather than to present yourself as a hero or victim or seek revenge. Autoethnography posits first that personal storytelling is an important way in and of itself of understanding and figuring out how to live in the world. It is a significant means, after all, in our daily life for coming to understand ourselves, each other, and the world we live in. We tell personal stories to each other. We listen to personal stories. We discuss them back and forth. Why leave this process out of our research projects? Second, autoethnography holds to the promise of understanding culture and social life through studying the personal and studying it emotionally. Good autoethnography is the link between the personal and the cultural. You, your emotions, thoughts, and sense of spirit are always affecting and being affected by social structure and culture. And that should be part of the story you tell. So what I'm arguing is that autoethnography, first person understanding, personal understanding is important in and of itself. And it's also an important way to understand the larger culture in which we live. Autoethnography tries to connect social science, usually, but not always, through an ethnographic approach with a literary presentation. Much of the data gathering is done through ethnographic processes. For example, field notes, memory, detailed thick description, even interviews. And then it is expressed through a story that often features scene setting, character development, dialogue, and plot. The goal is to create a text that evokes the reader to enter the experience of the teller, to feel what they feel, to bring their own feelings to the topic by thinking about how they might react in a similar situation. Autoethnography sometimes invites the reader to enter experience that is different from theirs, or to find companionship with those who have had similar experiences or troubles. So you can see from all this how important good writing would be in this perspective. Autoethnographic scholars work from different locations on the social science humanities spectrum, in terms of working ethnographically or from a more literary position, conveying their experiences from memory with evocative storytelling. Autoethnography also comes in many forms: short stories, essays, poems, performances, artistic works, and dance, for example. No matter the location on the social science humanities continuum, the goal of evocative autoethnography becomes to evoke rather than to inform or represent, to open up and continue discussions rather than close down meaning, much as we might expect a poem or literary short story to do. As in everyday life, where my story leads to your story, we ask the same of social science in the form of autoethnography. While analysis is often part of the process, sometimes it comes from the story itself. There is no better theory than a good story, I would argue. And other times, analysis appears embedded more in theory and concept. Even in the latter, often those participants in the study might be asked to take part in the analysis, and it might be set in a social scene with conversation among all. For example, very early in my career, I had a graduate student who studied long-term effects of breast cancer. She interviewed 5 people and wrote each of their stories in a different form, by the way, and then had each of them read their transcript and then invited them to dinner to discuss what they perceived to be the themes in their stories. So that dinner then became her last analytic chapter. And so you can see how this kind of participation spreads out the authority in the telling. I have done similar kinds of things with my interviews of Holocaust survivors, particularly with Jerry Rawicki, where we get together and look at the story, look at the transcripts, and then he helps me with the analysis. He tells me what they mean, and I could not have done the kind of analysis I did without him participating in it. And by the way, some people who privilege the more analytic aspects over the evocative ones are sometimes referred to as analytic autoethnographers. And we can talk about that at some point if you want. Autoethnography seeks to be an ethical practice. Since nobody lives and acts in a vacuum, autoethnography is always about the other and your interaction with those in your community. Since some of the others in your stories will be recognizable, ethical issues abound. I'm not going to get into the particulars here, but I will say that some of the questions autoethnographers ask are, what do you have a right to tell? What do you owe others in your stories? And what might be some of the consequences for you, others, your relationships, or groups you are a part of after the telling? Autoethnography has a spiritual and social justice component in that we seek to humanize research and academic storytelling and to present people in a holistic way. Above all, we care for those in our studies and stories, and we want our work to have the possibility of making the world a better and more loving place, one story at a time. I suggest that autoethnography is needed in this current time we live in, as we deal with world health crises, water and other environmental issues, political polarization, violence against children, and in our occupation, in the academy, students and faculty who are emotionally stressed out and in mental health turmoil. And just as an aside, I have witnessed how helpful writing autoethnography has been for students in classes and others dealing with trauma. And it might also be applied to more mundane events and to help to create more positive and joyful situations. I just read an article the other day on positive autoethnography. Now that was just a brief introduction, and I want to move to the chair piece that many of you have read and say just a little bit about it so that in case you didn't get a chance to read it, you can still follow along with the discussion. Given the plethora of ethical issues in autoethnography, it is rare that scholars write candidly about their workplaces, where colleagues can be identified and their own careers could be put into jeopardy. So I'd like to turn now to the chapter I did write while I was still in the academy. And I want to say this is only the second time I have presented anything from this piece. The first time is described in the article, in the chapter itself. And it's a lot easier to do this as a retired person, I want to tell you. This piece describes a situation of chaos in an academic department I was chairing from 2012 to 2014. After a 1.5-year honeymoon as chair, where my evaluations were glowing, disagreement broke out in a meeting over hiring. Should we be able to hire our own graduate students was one issue. The other issue was the direction of the department. Should it continue on the path that my partner Art Bachner and I had led it, which was one focusing on ethnography, narrative, autoethnography, along with critical cultural studies and performance, and also work that concentrated on social justice studies? Or should there be another direction? Should the old timers in the department, which essentially meant me and Art, my partner, should we have the power to make these decisions, or should there be a new, younger guard in control? I try in this piece to show what happened as a result of one meeting where I laid out a plan for hiring and encouraged faculty to be more cooperative with each other and more involved departmental members. This upset a number of faculty. As you probably know, faculty don't like to be critiqued. Afterwards, a few associate professors took charge of the department, refused to allow my partner and me to come to the meetings they held to talk about what had happened and how to resolve it, and ultimately refused to communicate with the two of us about these events. I describe what happened as workplace mobbing. The literature describes mobbing as what follows: a situation where a group gangs up and bullies a target. Often this action is precipitated by one event that went wrong, and the group feels they have good reason for participating in this collective effort. Often envy is an unconscious motivator. The group shuns, isolates, and marginalizes the target, often preventing that person or persons from attending secretive meetings or participating in governance activities. The law of group polarization often comes into play, with those agreeing more vociferously after the meeting than they did before. The victim is depersonalized and punished. The goal becomes to dominate, subjugate, and eliminate, and to get rid of the target in some way and win at all costs. While Art and I could have objected and probably regained control, since the dean was always on our side, we decided to step back. We felt it unfair to press on, given that we were close to retirement. And we weren't sure, given how we had been excluded and treated by colleagues, that we really wanted to put our energy into fixing this department, fixing in quotes. Perhaps it was time to let go and move on. The subtitle of this piece is Taking My Spirit Back. What do I mean by spirit? For me, it is my emotional and sacred soul or core. The part of me that feels and knows intuitively that love and compassion are what matter most. They are emotions that connect us to others, to a larger world, and that move us to be kind, gentle, and thoughtful in all we do. It is a sense of the self as a complex whole that thinks, feels, and acts with care and concern for human and other beings, and tries to act in each situation in a moral manner. To take my spirit back means that I vow to return to being that compassionate person who not only cares for others, but that deeply cares for self, while at the same time being willing to let go of my ego and my own sense of importance. To take back my spirit means to become and nourish all I can be, so that I can be and do for others and the larger world. It is getting rid of the constant mundane musing about how wrong things are and trying to be in a more meditative frame, appreciating the beauty in nature and all around me, and concentrating on the connections among us rather than the rifts. As chair, I had moved away from any semblance of that being to one who became angry, hurt, withdrawn, disconnected, unappreciated, and resentful. All for what felt at the time good reasons on my part. I was unable to understand why others were being who they were being and doing what they were doing. But that is not the space I want to live in. It is not the person I want to be. Can you be a spiritual being and be in a leadership position? I sure hope so. But at that time, in that particular situation, with those particular folks, I could not. So I resigned. And a short while later, using memory and documents, I wrote this piece to try to disentangle all the factors at play. Ageism, generational strife and change, power politics and emphasis on power relationships, composition of the department with few senior professors, envy of others' success, and lack of respect and gratitude among faculty for each other. I tried in my writing to look back from some distance and try to learn and understand, taking into account others' possible viewpoints as well as my own, and the structural and situational factors. I also looked at my own role and how others saw me, and I asked, how might I have behaved better? This construction, having to put a story together that I could live with and in, and that felt true to my experience, helped me to let go of the pain and move on. But autoethnography is not a panacea. Sometimes I still feel hurt and regret, like my partner and I were not treated fairly or appreciated for our dedication to the department. And I grieve for what could have been in terms of our departmental program. Though I do not want to live in grief, and I don't, I also recognize it as a legitimate and useful emotion that demonstrates care for what has been lost, and I give it its place. But I also know the secret to sanity, one of them anyway, is being able to let go and realize that all things are impermanent, a very Buddhist orientation. We had a 25-year run as a very successful creative, narrative, and autoethnographic department where love and care and positive relations were always uppermost in our minds and hearts. Now, Art and I have a fabulous retirement where we have more time for each other, for our friends, family, and our canine companion, where we celebrate nature through hiking in the mountains and gardening. And once again, as I did when I started this work back in the 1980s, we have moved from the desire to be let in to a secret departmental meeting. We have moved from that to concentrating our professional energies on a larger community around the globe. One that shares our values, that being vulnerable often requires strength of character and leads to deep understanding, that we should concentrate on how to live as well as how to know, and that research should be caring and compassionate, and that we seek to do work that is meaningful and has the possibility of making lives better, one story at a time. And that is good enough for me. That ends the part that is my talk. Thank you. And I want to now move to any questions, comments, stories that you might have about taking your spirit back in the workplace. And, hopefully some of our conversation might initiate some thoughts, whether they're spoken or not, on how we can become better colleagues to one another, especially in this difficult time in the universities. Perhaps some discussion of how we can get past feelings of pain and sadness, how we might work together, and how an autoethnographic perspective might help us to have a more emotionally and spiritually satisfying work life. And finally, perhaps we might even talk about how to see our careers as a calling rather than just a job. So those are just some ideas I have, but I just welcome any of your stories about anything that you would like to talk about.
Caroline, I see Terry and Catherine raising their hands already. Do you see
Okay.
them?
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi,
I can't thank you enough because I had a very traumatic situation, 20 years ago, and it really, eroded my whole professional career for the remaining years. I was the director of a small museum, and there was a commission that ran the museum as a nonprofit, and then the city dissolved the commission and took over the hiring process and hired me. So then I was caught in the crossfire between the commission that was dissolved and the city. And so you put a name to what I went through. I had to go to the administrative court. They had a detective follow me. It was all about residency. That was, that's what they could pin on me to get rid of me, And all I cared about was doing a good job for, the children of the city and, and so on. So fast forward, yesterday I went to court for a parking ticket, but I had paid the parking, but had a typo in the license. And so I still got a court summons. And then they kept changing the date and it hung over me 5 months. It was so stressful. And the reason why it's important to bring that up is because, again, I was innocent. I didn't do anything wrong. So it brought up all that old trauma, from the museum. And here I am the next day sitting with you. I've read your story. You gave me a name, workplace mobbing. That's exactly what it was. And think of the role of MSR, what a value you're giving me and like everyone else that's on this call. And it's important work. And I just want to bring up one other thing. I'm an art historian, an Asian art historian, besides a nonprofit administrator. And so art history students do research papers. And way back, 25 years ago, I changed the research paper to an essay, a first-person essay. And these papers that came back to me were unbelievable. And I thought they were good writers. So I have a collection, a 25-year collection of these essays. And I have written a chapter on appreciative intelligence. But now I have a forthcoming chapter. And there was one art object that was very, that the students really responded to. And it's a bodhisattva who's, one strong point is listening, Guanyin, to regard the voice of the world, right? And the students really responded. And in their writings, they tell how they prayed to her and, they poured their hearts out to her. So that forthcoming chapter, I titled it Mystics in the Museum. And it really, just to the point of what you're saying, that tapping into their transcendent selves, they really do want to see the world as a better place. Plus they're millennials. I think that goes along with millennials, for all my years of teaching. So I needed to learn about autoethnography. So I'm just so excited. You can hear the passion in my voice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry. I do hear the passion in your voice, and I think you have wonderful information in these stories that you have collected. And I've empathized with the experience that you went through, certainly. Yeah. Catherine.
Hello, Carolyn and everyone. It's delightful to meet you. I've certainly known of your work for a long time, although that hasn't been the main focus in mine. So I'll just introduce myself to you since we don't know one another, and that's where you come from. First off, I'm a sociologist also, and I went into sociology in graduate school having taken 0 courses in it before, because I studied French and Russian literature, because I wanted to connect with people who spoke different languages in different parts of the world. That was really, and also the literatures and the way they sounded. I loved the sound of French and the way it's in a different part of the mouth than English or Russian, and the pace is different. So for a long time, that's kind of where I lived, but I wanted to see how to help work with society. And when I came to sociology, I would say the main thing I noticed was that in studying with wonderful people who created, I mean, I had great benefits. I studied with people who created the concepts and the methods. But this notion of roles and status as being what we study, I kept thinking that starts, and I don't know why I had the image of the knee, but that it started from the knee up, that there was no grounding. And that was before I started studying Buddhism, or I'm also a Feldenkrais practitioner. So I just had the sense there was no human being that walked on the earth. In
That's great.
sociology looked at people because it looked at roles and statuses, and that roles and statuses really matter, but they matter for human beings who walk and live on the earth and as I now know, are composed of all of the same elements that compose this earth that if we don't treasure, we will destroy as a group of human beings. So I'm also a two-time department division chair, and one time went through a comparably painful experience as yours that I won't go into. And now I'm on the board of MSR and also honored to be in the group. MSR has a kindness in it that is atypical in many parts of the academic world. And they created a group they called the Flame Keepers. I mention this not to like boast or something, but because I think many here may not know about this. And I think it's wonderful. So that various people from MSR who have given to MSR get invited to be part of this group, and there's at least 2 others here today, to try to hold the flame, the spirit of MSR, and to find ways to help keep that alive in MSR. So that, I don't know any other academic group I've been in that has something like that. So I wanted you to know about that part. The good stories too, I think, are really important to tell. I won't tell my painful ones because yours is painful enough for me.
For all of us, right?
I just do want to say the implications I see of bringing you into MSR, which I think is a really wonderful event today, is that the way you described spirit and bringing spirit back in, I'm so glad this is recorded so we can look at your words again, because I sense that in a way that it's not tied to any particular tradition, to religion, or even the question of religion or not religion, which has been contentious in MSR, but is an enlivening process. So I very much want us to look at the way you describe that and see how that perhaps part of our purpose really is to help infuse that not just into the Academy of Management, but into academia. And I don't know how, but in who knows how ways. So I thought that that will make this session really, really important, and that the implications for methodology and how we live together in departments, whatever the field, is very important, because this goes way beyond social sciences. So thank you, and thank you, everybody. And thank you, Tuan Yu.
Thank you, Catherine. It's lovely to meet you, another sociologist. And I love what you said, that it was like studies started at the knee. That's great. And I used to say, there are no people in sociology. We're the people, there were concepts, but no people. And I do appreciate what you said about this particular group's sense of kindness, love, and concern. I can feel it, even this far away from you as I am. I can feel it, and I could certainly feel it during the time that I worked with Tian Yun to put this together. So I'm very happy that you have this group to work with.
One more comment though, because I never saw it this way, that what Otto Scharmer calls absencing as a way of relating to life, and I won't go into descriptions, but many here know of it. I think that social science writing, the way we've been trained to do it, is a form of absencing, right? We are absencing ourselves and we're trained to do that. So how to learn how to be as clear and honoring of sources and all that we learn in scholarly writing and bringing ourselves in as well seems really important. So thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Mary. Hello. I think you need to unmute.
Well, Carolyn, I'm so happy to see you. I don't expect you to remember me, but a long time ago in year 2000, I drove to Athens, Georgia, to attend the qualitative research.
I do remember.
And
yeah.
I just have to say to everyone that I think that what is so potent about your work and so important is that the sound that comes out of you, the sound of your story, the vibration of it is so powerful. When I heard you give a keynote speech at that conference, people from all over the world were there. And I was just thrilled. I was just thrilled. But I also was afraid for you because I knew the president of the university was in the front row, and I thought he's never heard anything like this. He's never heard somebody come out from their scholarship and sound like this. And so there is a learning process of listening. There's a presence and a deep listening that also has to happen for this kind of work. It's a co-created thing. In other words, you can bring what you can, but we have to be listening into it. And then I got a chance to be mentored by you because they had mentors. And I said, I'd like Carolyn to be my mentor. And we went into a room and I was going to show you some videos that I was making, multimedia stuff related to it. And you got it. We kept getting interrupted because people wanted to talk with you. So everybody was wanting, and so you finally, after a couple of other meetings, because we kept getting interrupted, you came to my room and you invited me to come to a conference you were doing down in Tampa or in St. Petersburg on new edges of ethnography. So I got exposed to not only your work, but all these wonderful people that were there. And you asked me to share my work in progress in several different settings. And so I felt so lucky to be there, but I actually I didn't have people around me at that time that had your background into that kind of listening. So it was so important. I just hope that everybody here can participate, whether it's on Zoom or in other ways, in these kinds of conferences. Carolyn just gives so much, but I think that this kind of work that you're doing is actually life-giving to you also. There's no way you could create such spaces for such wonderful things to happen. So anyway, I'm just so excited to see you and especially with all the MSR people.
Yes, thank you, Mary. And I remember each and every one of those events, though I didn't have them in my mind, but they have come back as you spoke about them. And I was so happy to see that you were here. And I remember that event was so important in 2000, and then that conference that you attended afterwards. And somebody, I haven't been able to look at the chat. I'm sorry, but I did see that somebody asked me about the organization and conference that I had mentioned. And I'm gonna just put the URL in here so that you can go here. Okay, I think that went to, oh, did that just go to, oh, I just went to Terry. Hold on. Let me make it to everybody. You go to the site, it's a site was started by my graduate student, Tony Adams, and we've had 4 or 5 or more annual conferences, and the last 2 have been online, and they're all autoethnography conferences. And next year we're going to have one online in March, and then we're going to have a smaller one in person in January in St. Petersburg. The one in person will be in St. Petersburg on the beach, the same place that we held one in 1990 and 2000 and 2010. The online conference, which I invite you to, we've had like a couple of 300 registrants or more. And what you do for that conference, it's very well put together, I think. You actually do your presentation, videotape your presentation ahead of time, and it gets sent to us, the conference site, and people have access to your presentation ahead of time. And then the conference is all discussion of these presentations and also interviews of people who've been important in autoethnography, as well as book presentations about books on autoethnography with the author being interviewed and so on. So I invite all of you to submit a presentation, or if not, just to come. It's pretty inexpensive. It's been $50. I think we might go up a little bit, but you get workshops, you get everything for the small amount of money. So everybody come and join us and see what we're into.
And just to say also that, Carolyn, no doubt that you are with kindred spirits right now, right here.
I feel that.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. Stacy.
Hi, Carolyn. Thank you so much for your presentation and the article. I really enjoyed reading that. I do feel like you're evoking my my interest in becoming in returning to being a scholar. I went into administration a few years ago and finished the tail ends of some streams that I had gotten into the scholarship of teaching and learning because I just felt the dry desert of traditional research and what was happening. And I feel like my question is going to show some naivety. I have a lot of reading to do to learn about this entire area. But I wonder if you can speak about that line between, not that they have to be distinct, therapy and working your stuff out in public versus the really skillful perspective that I heard you taking. And I mean, some of this is self-therapy, right? It's self-processing. You talked about that. But I don't know, like talk about the journey or the line, or how did you find that, or are there principles within the field that I know that when I started my teaching and I learned, I found my voice in the classroom and I began to sing and I evoked deep learning in the classroom. My critics, and there was always a couple in the classes and definitely peers that said, you're just using the classroom as therapy. You're working out your own stuff. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
Okay, yeah, it's a very interesting question, really. And let me just see what, I'm going to open my mouth and see what comes out. When I taught classes, I used to tell people, I used to tell my young students, my undergraduate students, that, you know, we were going to do group therapy. That's what we were going to do. Very early in my career, when I said something about my research being therapeutic, I got lots of pushback, because you're not supposed to use sociology or social science and therapy in the same sentence. And at first I thought, okay, well, I have to like figure out how to say this so that I'm not claiming it's therapy. And then after a while, it's like, well, why not? You know, why not let it? I don't want to do anything that's not therapeutic. For somebody, my readers, my participants, myself, hopefully all of us. And so I rebelled against having therapy or therapeutic and sociological in the same sentence. I wanted to do that. And all my work, I hope, is therapeutic for something. That being said, it is, you know, it can be dangerous. So in classrooms, I had some people who were, you know, had some mental health problems. And if you take this on, especially in a classroom of undergraduates and even graduate students, I had a graduate student who was suicidal. I mean, so you have to be willing and competent in helping people to find not just what they are comfortable doing, but what will not do them any harm. And so there is a fine line. I don't like to think about lines, but there's a continuum where it's okay to be uncomfortable. This work makes you uncomfortable, and that's how you discover. But you have to be careful that you're not getting to a situation where a person telling or writing a story and sharing it publicly might not be harmful to their mental health. Okay, so not everybody can do this kind of work, because I don't think everybody is competent with those kinds of skills in reading and understanding people and their issues. Okay, everybody can't do this work either, because not everybody can write in an evocative way. We had that. We probably could do it as kids, and we had it knocked out of us through academic training. You know, that wasn't intellectual, that wasn't scholarly. So you have to almost go back and read novels and figure out, you know, how to do this kind of writing. As far as how it works for me, I mean, I do find this writing extremely therapeutic. It has helped me understand and get through and cope with and reframe many situations. And as I tried to say in my talk, not just by exploring my own thoughts and deeper thoughts and emotions and deeper emotions, but also by making myself, and I always made my students do this as well, think about how other people in my story would tell the story. And so I love the concept of taking the role of the other. I think it's one of the best concepts that sociologists have ever had, but to really put yourself in that place. And so when I had all my undergraduates, more than half of them had trouble with parents, you know, and I was kind of a stand-in mother, and then I became a stand-in grandmother, for them to talk about their problems, and the exercise of having them say, here's the way my mother would tell the story, was amazing. And also watching them find each other. My parents are divorced, so are mine, and talk and figure out ways of coping and reframing the story, really reframing, you know, redoing a story that was healthy and that they could live in, as opposed to this one they had created that they got stuck in. So I don't, you know, and then there always comes a time, you know, that you think, well, this is beyond what I can do to help this person, this student. I need to know how to get them access to other therapists and so forth to work. And so you have to know when that is going on as well. And sometimes I wouldn't let students tell the story. My suicidal student, I said, you cannot, I didn't say it that way. I mean, it was a very, you know, collaborative kind of conversation, but I just said, I don't think it's a good idea for you to revisit your suicide attempt and go into detail about it. Let's move on and talk about what you're doing to cope with those kinds of feelings that you have. Let's make it a more positive kind of thing. So it's it's tricky, and it's not easy. Some people say, oh, you just go write a story about your life. That's nothing. Well, it is very complicated. So I'm not sure I addressed your question, but.
Oh, you did. For me, it's the line between sitting in the stance of a victim. And so you talk about, I love what you said, continuing to work it till it's a story, like also the perspective of the other, but continuing to work it till it's a story you can live in.
Yeah.
And there are times where some people, there's value in living in the story of a victim. And so how that is that scholarship, I don't know, I guess I'll work this out myself.
Yeah, no, and I love what you're saying, because I tell my students and anybody I'm working with, we're not writing ourselves as victims. We are rewriting our story, not that we're telling an untruth, but we are rewriting it in a way that we can cope with it and live in it, as you said. And that's a very powerful sense that people don't normally have. They think the past is the past. Well, we rewrite the past all the time. And how about consciously rewriting the past in a way that makes the present better and the future more hopeful?
Caroline, sorry to jump in, but we have 2 more people raising their hands and a number of comments and questions in the chat if you would like to respond. So I'm just reminding you, we have only 15 minutes left.
Okay, let's take the 2 people with their hands up, and then maybe you could pick out 1 or 2 of the comments for me. Okay,
Sure.
Roshan?
Hello, Carolyn. I'm calling from India.
Hello, welcome.
And I must thank you and your partner for really giving legitimacy to this method. I have read your work, your books, and some of your articles. However, I'm also very glad to tell you that much before this word was coined, I did my doctorate in the field of management way back in late 70s and in 1981 from the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, India, which is the leading #1 institution in the country. And I'm very grateful to my thesis advisory committee for letting me do something which was not at all considered, legitimately academic. I did my doctorate in the field of organization development, and I was personally involved in both ethnographic research and some interventions. So when it came to writing my dissertation, I kept on saying one thing, that I have only one story to tell, which is my own. There is nothing else I can say. And of course, I went through a very deep struggle. I spent 1 year just making outlines and tearing them apart and throwing away the papers. And eventually I had to go into therapy and I kept on telling my therapist that I want to make my own statement based on my own experience. It was a struggle. Eventually I did write my dissertation. And I'm glad to tell you, I wrote it in a first person. My whole thesis was in first person. And it went to the examination. My dissertation advisor was the leading social psychologist of the country and the leading organization development expert in the country. And he supported me, and it went to an examination committee. They asked me after the whole story, I told my story thematically, various thematic themes within organization development, because it was an open-ended field study. but they asked me to write a chapter conceptualizing what I did. So then I added an analytical chapter in which I conceptualized now I was at a distance. I was not directly involved in the field. So I sat back in my hostel room and wrote that chapter in which I conceptualized my situation and my role. And I developed a concept called multi-level action research system, because it was a very large corporation in which I did my study. All India corporation, offices all over the country, thousands of offices, various levels of organization. So I conceptualized it as a multi-level action research system. And I derived the epistemological basis from one of the philosophers who gave me support was Willem Dilthey, who made a distinction between the human sciences and the other sciences. And he made a distinction between idiographic and nomothetic sciences. And that gave me a kind of an epistemological argument, more like an historical research, historiography, but in which I'm also an actor. So that is what made it what you now call, and I'm so glad that it has a legitimacy, called autoethnography.
It's amazing that you were doing this in 1979. Yeah.
Yes, and I think there's shortage of time, so I won't take too much time, but I think there's a very strong epistemological basis to this kind of research.
Yeah.
And I derived strength from a lot of authors, including, since you are a sociologist, you would know C. Wright Mills, who was a strong believer in, it's sociological imagination, his classic.
Yes.
So I think we need to, and since we are talking in the MSR context, it can also be called first-person research, which is one of the major things which needs to be added to the repertoire of research in the MSR domain. So autoethnography is a kind of first-person research.
Certainly.
In a cultural context.
And in fact, initially, that's what we referred to it as, first-person research. That was one of the terms we used.
Yeah. So I'm so glad, and I won't take too much time because somebody else wants to speak, and I'm delighted that you are available to all of us in sharing your experience, which has become such iconic. Yours and your partners, both of you have written so much about it.
Thank you so much for all your comments. I really appreciate that. Shelley.
Hi, Carolyn. I just want to express my deep, deep gratitude to you and all of the work that you have done. When I found your work early in my academic reading as a PhD student, I was looking for ways of engaging with Indigenous storytelling towards social and environmental justice, and reading Joanne Archibald's work on connecting heart, mind, body, and spirit. And your work was really inspirational in connecting from a two-eyed seeing approach. Joanne Archibald's work of really engaging within myself, with my heart, mind, body, and spirit, and connecting those ways of experiencing the world to relate to the stories that I was engaging with in the collective that I was exploring. And it was a way of writing about how I was experiencing those stories, journaling my thoughts and feelings, being vulnerable in that space of allowing myself to be present within the collective of stories. And so I just wanted to deeply, deeply express gratitude for your work, and especially the heartful autoethnography work that you did. And it gave that voice to me where I was allowed to actually express vulnerability, which I had seen in the collective stories that I was working with. They were always exploring heart and hardship, triumph and trauma. And they were balancing between these spaces in such beautiful ways. So when I was looking at Joanne Archibald's work in relation to yours, it was powerful. And I wanted to just say thank you so much for all of the work that you have done. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much, Shelley, for your comments. I appreciate it. Tom.
Hi, Carolyn. Yeah, I just want to say to me, this is groundbreaking work that you're doing. And I just want to add another perspective in terms of the education that I received. I studied under Hee-Soon Bai and Abraham Cohen. You may not know them, they're educators. But they talked about inner work. And the way Abraham is a psychologist. And his view was that this is different than therapy in the sense that it's a public exercise. It's not done in the context of a psychologist. Mm-hmm. And so it's work that we as a community can do together to help all of us explore the inner life of all of us. And so this stands in contrast to the whole idea of education, which is about learning about the external world. It's all about, the science of life. Like if we think of traditional education, it's the science of living, meaning what's happening out there. What is the average? Like you stand apart, you stand apart from it and figure out what's going on out there. And we never pay attention to the inner life or the inner landscape that we're experiencing. We just ignore it, but it's where we live. And so to me, this is really important work because it balances this whole emphasis on the external world and brings it into the place where we live. And so it's powerful, it's important, and it gives legitimacy to who we are as human beings. So, whether you call it inner work, first-person research, I think it's a skill that is absolutely necessary to heal some of the trauma that we have in our society today. And it's a nascent field of education that just needs more work, more emphasis, more exploration. How do you work with this field? So I just thank you so much for sharing your experience and your approach. This is really amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for all your comments. And, I love the thought of, autoethnography is, looking at that inner world, really privileging that, but connecting it then back to the external world. So I think that connection is, really important. And it is interesting. Education, talks about how do we know? That's the focus. But what about how to live? How do we live? I wanted education to help me, and it did know how to live or think about how to live. And that's what I always wanted to do for my students as well. And you can't do that without really looking at the internal.
And it goes back to the ancient Greek maxim, know thyself. I mean, it's so, we've ignored this completely.
Yeah.
They don't say know the external world. They say to be
ignore emotions, and if you think about, I love the concept that autoethnography is radical empiricism. It's very empirical. It's like, let's look at every factor that we can think to look at, including what the researcher is thinking and feeling, to really make it empirical. Otherwise, you're leaving out half of what the influence is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or more. Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Tian. Yes, I just want to say that there are so many wonderful comments in the chat, and I apologize to our participants. I cannot read them all due to time limit, but I really want to read this one. This is a message sent directly to me. The participant wants me to ask this question anonymously on her behalf. So the question is, do you have any advice on how to write personal truths through autoethnography regarding trauma in a higher education institution as a result of a precarious employment as a long-time adjunct and the inherent inequity and toxicity in that experience. And it's the same precarity that disallow her the safety of speaking about it. Not being able to write about her experience feels doubly harmful.
Okay, and this person is an adjunct professor. Did I hear you say that?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that, you know, that is such an important topic. I mean, I can't believe that we as the professoriate ignore the plight of people who are adjuncts. One of my former students who happens to live a mile from me and is 78 years old, and she's teaching at 4 different places as an adjunct to make, you know, $20,000 a semester, if that, and putting her heart and soul into it, and with no insurance and no benefits. I watch her and I'm just appalled that we're letting this take place without much critique of it at all. And sometimes I think it's a little bit selfish that, you know, tenured professors just don't want to rock the boat, right? Because, you know, they take some of the burden off of what you're doing, but also they don't know how to rock the boat is the other part of it. So how do you write about it? And you could write anonymously, you know, take on a false name, but then of course you don't get credit for the publication, but it may not matter if you're an adjunct professor in terms of your career, although it might matter if you hope someday to get a tenure track position, but they're going away. I was reading the other day in Florida, 30% of faculty are tenure track. I mean, it's really horrible. Of course, Florida's worse than most of the world, but that's another whole topic. How do you do it? I would first sit down and write it for yourself and not leave anything out. Just get it down on paper. And then one way to do it, okay, Carol Rambo, which is might be a name that some of you recognize, did a paper called Strange Accounts. And I mentioned that in the article that you read. And she was writing about applying to be chair of a department. And she felt that she couldn't identify a lot of her colleagues and so forth, and she had to protect herself and so on. And so she writes it in a way that you can't tell who's having the thoughts. There are other people who've done this, Chris Poulos and Norm Vinson, where you write, so I'm spinning here, but if you wrote this with some other people who were adjuncts, you could not identify who each speaker is. So you'd have each person tell their story and then put it together in a conversation. So you wouldn't know who was speaking. That would protect your identity, at least to some extent, and to a great extent, as a matter of fact. So that, my recommendation would be to either write it anonymously or get some other people that you interview yourself, or you have collaborative interviews where you interview each other and have discussions about it, and then you write it up as a story and do not identify who is saying what. That's one way to do it, and that would protect you. And then there might come a time when you say, let's throw all caution to the wind, put my name on it, here's my experience, and see what happens. I worried, I mean, when I wrote Final Negotiations, which, you know, it's back in the 80s, 70s. I was young. There was lots of sex and drugs in the book. And now you'll go read it, right? But I worried, you know, well, what if the president of the university reads this? Well, nothing really happened. I got a lot of critique for it. And you have to be ready for that, because when you put your story out there, you can't control how people respond to it. And that has to be part of the process. So when I got really negative critiques to Final Negotiations, at first it just devastated me. And then I said, Carolyn, if you're going to keep doing this work, you have to be ready for negative critiques. And I came to feel that while I do not think good autoethnography is self-obsessed, it is not, but holding on to, oh, this person critiqued it and this person said something negative, That's obsession, self-obsession. And so at that point, I felt like what you do is you say, I've put it out there, and the way that people respond tells me something about them and who they are. And it's really the sociology starting to work, because you start to see the response, you start to see how people speak from their own experiences, from their gender, from their race, from all these categories that we like to think about as sociologists. And you have to let that happen, let that evolve, and see that as a way of understanding others as opposed to a critique on the self. Now, that's probably easier said than done, but if you have that as an orientation, that's also very helpful. Now, on the other hand, you don't want to lose your job as an adjunct because of what you wrote. So I would say, above all else, what matters is you're taking care of yourself and bringing no harm to yourself. And of course, that can happen even if you're not writing about your career, but you're writing about family. You know, it has consequences. And so you always have to be ready for those consequences. I hope that addressed your friend.
Thank you, Caroline. If I may, I would suggest we extend this webinar for 10 more minutes, because we have one last person raising her hand. I want to give space to her, and then I will wrap up the meeting. Thank you.
Can you also just make sure that you copy the chat and send it to all the people?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Mary. Margaret, please.
Greetings. And can y'all hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes.
Oh, okay. First of all, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Ellis, for giving us your experiences and all your research and all the groundbreaking ideas that you have brought to research. And I just had to kind of jump in and share my own experience to the whole idea of education and going from self-referral and not being objective referral. So I wanted to congratulate you first on being a creator, not a reactor. You have come to bring your own compassion and love to a situation. And I recently finished my doctoral studies last June.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, it was a long haul, I'll tell you that. And if I hadn't been attending Maurice International University, it's a unique and wonderful school that bases the whole idea on self-referral, that you go to your own inner self, your own Atma, and then you come out and create in the world. And everyone there practices transcendental meditation. And I've had the great joy of practicing for, well, almost 50 years, transcendental meditation. So I was attracted to go to MIU because it was a consciousness-based school, and everybody there enjoys meditating. So I would, with a feather, say, check out tm.org, and you will see more about the benefits. It's very simple, very easy, very natural process of going within to your own inner light, your own inner self, your own inner unbounded awareness, that field of all possibilities and of being invincible. So I think everybody here is invincible. They're fantastic. I salute everybody on their trail. But I personally have just really enjoyed and made great progress, and was able, through the support of nature, to do my research on sustainable architecture, on MBA Maharishi Vastu Architecture, which you might find very fascinating. And I wanted to just share that with you all and salute you on being that creator, not a reactor. So many people are doing objective referral instead of subjective referral. Create from yourself, and whatever's happening, you can have a response of creativity, of love, understanding, and compassion, rather than getting in this situation where you're fighting back and so on. It's really a question of your own self. Who am I? Well, who are we? Who am I? I'm the universe. And Maharishi says, Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahm. Aham Vishwam. I am the universe. So we're exploring a universe always of our own self and reinterpreting that, which you have done so brilliantly. And we just really applaud everything you've done. And it's just really an honor to be here today with such luminaries. And thank you so much. All the best to everyone.
Thank you so much. And I love the idea of being a creator rather than a reactor. That's beautiful. Yes. So thank you. Sounds like you've been in a wonderful program. I want to come and be in that program.
Well, come and join us. Come see us at Fairfield, Iowa. And Dr. Neil is my mentor. And we would welcome so joyfully the opportunity to have you come and see our campus and meet everybody. And it would be such an honor to have you. And we'll have a celebration. I think that's the key, besides transcending all the problems, to go to the source of the solution, is to have a celebration, to enjoy, to radiate, to magnify the good, which you emphasize so wonderfully throughout your talk, that you have to look at the good that is at hand, magnify that, celebrate, have fun, enjoy. And that's what Maharishi said, that the purpose of life is what? The expansion of happiness. So you have brought us a vast expansion of happiness here today. And we'd love to invite you to come, and we'll have a wonderful celebration, have a big cake and candle lighting, and really enjoy and celebrate all that you have accomplished, and how we could collaborate to go forward and have an even greater global scale of invincibility, because we are invincible. And you have brought that out so beautifully to us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So Carolyn, any final thought you'd like to share with us?
Yes, this has been wonderful. I mean, as a retired person, sometimes I think, well, do I really want to keep doing this? And then I do it, and the answer always is, of course I want to keep doing it, because I meet all these incredible people online and make these contacts and I get to see the value of the work I do sitting in my study all by myself. And also I get to, think about, where am I now? I mean, it's an introspective experience to put this together and think about, where am I with all this? Who am I? Who do I want to be? Am I being who I want to be? So it's a real reflection. And I really could feel the generosity and the kindness and the care coming through the airwaves. So you have made my day. And when I'm through with this, I will run downstairs, literally as fast as I can in my 72-year-old body, and to tell Art, who's down there working and waiting to hear how it went, about my experience. And he will be just thrilled to hear how much I enjoyed doing this and how valuable it was to me. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and for everyone for this wonderful workshop or webinar. Because of time, we cannot have one more comment. So I would like to summarize our webinar by sharing a few takeaways for me. So I've learned something from this webinar. I learned that autoethnography is in the core of spiritual writing. It can be therapeutic, healing, and empowering. So research can be healing and empowering. And then personal experiences should be valued as legitimate knowledge base. Actually, it should be the source of the deep knowledge for everyone. And we should be able to bring literary writing into autoethnography and spiritual research, especially when it's challenging to expose your identity, because of the vulnerability. As a writer, you may use fictional writing to protect, to some extent, to feel safe when writing. So there are many challenges in the writing of autoethnography, but I think sincerity and authenticity should be the most important element, both for the writer and the reader. So thank you again for participating in this webinar. At last, I'd like to invite Anil to announce the next MSR research webinar, please.
Yeah, so thank you, appreciate. So Dr. Alice Callan, welcome. And my colleague, Margaret Rose, beautifully gave you a flavor of who we are in a small town in Iowa. And we would love to have you here and give you a flavor of what self-referral research is. We do consciousness-based research. I also had a couple of insights, but you kind of hit upon the same points. I'll go through them in 30 seconds. I thought it was about consciously explaining the past as history and a bit of inner work, mental health, it's a lot of benefits out of doing it for oneself and for others. And I also felt that we were talking about beyond learning objective knowledge and actually more about developing empathy and love and listening. And in some ways, like Margaret Rose talked of, connecting with one's higher self as a, unseen and manifest, or the connectivity as a whole of the humanity as a whole. So thinking from the perspective of humanity. And I think Rajan brought out the first person writing of dissertation. His mentor and advisor was also my advisor at the same school. And he was talking about radical empiricism, right? And you talked of. And I thought, again, this Professor Anil Gupta from IIM Ahmedabad, he says, how do I value this kind of work? And he said, I value it by how much I learn from it. And I think, or I would say more broadly from the evocative language, that's how much it evokes in me. So I think that is how we would value, which is subjective research, but there's a way of valuing it. Now, just my honor to present the next webinar. First of all, thank you very much for joining, and I hope to see you on the next webinar, which is, okay, here it is. Sorry, yeah. So it is Dr. Charles Stackney from Copenhagen Business School, and he'll be talking a little bit more about the broader picture. It'll be different from this one, more about meta science of academy of management, supporting the global manager, all the research approaches that are followed in academy. And I'm sure we'll inject this perspective also in it. So it is tentatively on May 9th and about the same time. So we again, thank you all very much for joining. And once again, thanks to everybody for participating. And thanks for Tian Yuan and Tom and Ramya and others for organizing this event. Such a successful event, one of the larger attended events. And Carolyn, you were such a magnet. And we would love to honor you and come visit us whenever you are ready and available.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.